Hello everyone, welcome to today's persecution report titled Women in Bangladesh From Progress to Pushback. And a very happy International Women's Day to all of you. We are very privileged to be with you in this special day. And today, this year's International Women's Day's theme is Right, Justice, Action for All Women and Girls. As the UN calls for action to dismantle all barriers, all injustice, and all weak protection of law for every woman and every girls around the world. In today's episode of Persecution Report, we will talk about the journey that our women in Bangladesh started towards the path of progress during Sheikh Hasina's eras. Now, in post Sheikh Hasina's eras, if we are still making this journey towards progress, or our journey is being held for various other reasons. And I am very lucky today to be with you and be surrounded by three very beautiful feminist people with me. Today I have Anwar Sada Jihan. You know him very well. You see him every week. He's an aerospace engineer and a columnist. And we have Jasmine Choudhury. She is a human rights campaigner and a senior health practitioner. Welcome to you both. And I'm very honored to present for the first time in our program, Oditi Day. She is a university registry manager as a profession and a beautiful singer and artist in passion as well. So, Jihan, is that okay if I turn to you to start with us? Now, the thing is, since 5th of August 2024, we have witnessed some really tragic incident that happened to women. We have seen the shift of mentality of many people and many political parties. And we have seen some changes of law, and it did not do any good for our women at all. And since the new government took power in Bangladesh as well, some of the people in Bangladesh, they were being hopeful that situation might change. But at least I haven't witnessed any change, at least any positive change. Instead, we have seen some decline as well. So, Jihan, would you mind taking us through what is happening for last year and a half and what is happening after the election in February as well? So, Jihan?
Thank you, Ms. Meher, and special thanks to Ms. Choudhury and Ms. Day for taking the time to join us today. Let me first start by congratulating all three of you on this International Women's Day. Your uniqueness, your intellect, and your abilities make you special. Always remember that you are not only equal, but in cases more than others of society. And you all make society stronger. And I would like to also take the opportunity to congratulate all women of the world on this very special day. Now let's switch our focus to Bangladesh and the condition of women in Bangladesh. Here you can see two pictures. On the left, I'm sure you all have seen this cartoon. You know, it was a cartoon from our childhood about Meena and Raju, a brother and sister. And during that time, that cartoon was used to promote that a brother and sisters are equal. Meena is equal to Raju. From that time, when people used to think that Meena deserves less food than Raju because she is a girl. From that time, we have come to the photo on the right, where you can see Flight Lieutenant Naima Haq and Flight Lieutenant Lutfi, two Bangladesh Air Force pilots who went to UN to protect humanity. And this all happened, most of this achievement happened under the Awami League government. Now, speaking of the Awami League government, speaking of Bangladesh as a whole, if we take a look at the history of Bangladesh and the 35 years, we will see that Bangladesh belonged to women, these women leaders. She, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she worked tirelessly to improve the condition of women in Bangladesh. Then the catastrophe of July 2024 happened. So the religious fanatics took over, religious bigots took over, misogynistic people took over, and we have seen a sharp rise in violence against women. We have been talking about this non-stop last 18 months because we have seen mobs attacking women, we have seen women being tortured and killed and whatnot. Now, if we take a look at the numbers, at the statistics, and if we compare the numbers between 2024 and 2025, we will see that there has been a 52% rise in total rape and gang rape victims. The number of girl victims increased by 47%. And these are reported numbers. For a country like Bangladesh that is kind of conservative, oftentimes rape does not get reported for one reason or the other. So these numbers may be even more. The type of violence that women face in Bangladesh, here are the types, from home, from household to the workplace. Harassments against them are not anything new. If we take a look at some recent incidents, a chilling photo of this 8-year-old minor girl with her throat slit after being raped in Chittagong. 8 years old girl. Now talk is cheap. We can talk because there was another girl in Nagura, Asiya, who also passed away. So this is becoming a trend in Bangladesh, the violence against minor girls, which is highly, highly alarming. Then, if we take a look at the incident in Pabna, an elderly grandmother was hacked to death while trying to prevent her grandchild from being abducted. We have seen her dead body in her house, while we have seen the dead body of the rape victim, in the mustard field. And then in Noshindi, the so-called BMP leaders, the BMP is in power now. These BMP leaders were arrested because they were raped. After raping, when the victim demanded justice, she was killed. And then the situation of minority in Bangladesh, the religious minority, is horrible right now. And on top of that, when you are a minority girl, we can only imagine how tough the situation is in Bangladesh. So, Ms. Meher, in terms of violence, we are not anywhere where we need to be. We are not anywhere where we need to be. We have been talking about all this. So many groups have been raising their concerns about all this, but what it appears to me is that we have failed. We have failed to protect this 8-year-old girl from being the victim. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of your input today to how we can improve this situation going forward. Back to you, Ms. Meher.
Thank you, Jihan. Thank you for giving us a tour. It is a grim, grim situation, and of course, it is very tragic when we fail to safeguard our very, very young girls, we fail to protect them, we fail to save them. So it looks like we failed in our duty as well. And Jihan, I also remember talking to you very recently when you were very frustrated about what is happening with girls and women in Bangladesh, and we all shared the frustration. Now, um, I want to talk to you guys and to viewers as well is why this is happening. So when we see the situation of women in Bangladesh, it is not only rape, though rape is in staggering rate, but also women are being harassed in employment. The women in education, they are not safe there either. Looks like somehow women's journey is like everybody and everything is trying to stop the women journey in Bangladesh somehow. So in this context, Ms. Chaudhary, if I can come to you, can you please tell us what do you think? To what extent do you think the political shift continue to limit the autonomy of women in Bangladesh? Though the law and policy suggest otherwise. What is actually happening, Ms. Chaudhary?
Thank you, Ms. Maher and Mr. Jihan, for your slide presentations. It's an honor and a privilege to join you all on a very significantly important day, International Women's Day. And I want to say Happy International Women's Day to all the women and men out there who on a day-to-day basis are fighting, are raising their voices, are showing up to fight for equality, rights of women, justice and action. Turning to your question, to what extent do I think political shift continue to limit women's autonomy in Bangladesh? I think in order to do this question full justice, I think it's really important to put this into the context of Bangladesh's history and political history's context. So first we have the sort of the colonial past and the post-colonial legacies where Bangladesh's history under the British colonial rule and then as part of Pakistan shaped the gender norms, if you like, the legal systems and educational process. For example, the traditional patriarchal structures were reinforced and women's formal participation in public life remained oppressed. Now, the turning point for Bangladeshi women came in 1971 with our liberation war, but it also left a huge, the deep scars, if you like, where women suffered inconceivable level of violence. Hindu women, intellectual, and any progressive thinkers among the women were particularly targeted. So Jamaat-e-Islam collaborated with the Pakistani army to kidnap, to rape, torture women. Up to around 400,000 is the estimate during the 9 months conflict in 1971. Women were tied up with no garment to cover their body, as they would often use their garments, saris, wurnas, to commit suicide. They were raped and tortured on a daily basis for months after months. So you can perhaps, contemplate or explain that Jamaat and their philosophy was against the liberation war, but it is not possible for any philosophy or any political stance to explain or justify this kind of brutality and the most kind of gruesome crimes against humanity that Jamaat and the Pakistani army carried out in 71 in Bangladesh. So Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman recognized the trauma and the backlash, the survivors of the 1971, the women, the survivors faced. He gave them his name as their father, who was committed, and he was committed to protecting all their rights and to, ensure that they lived in society with full dignity. His death and the following decades then of political instability in Bangladesh, the shifts between military and civilian rule, and the partisan polarization that affected women's rights, and the implementation of the policies that were supporting women's education, all kind of you know, kind of mediated the political climate, including periods of where gender equality almost ceased to exist in Bangladesh. The principles of the 1972 constitution, rooted in secularism, equality, and justice, were the foundations laid by Bangabandhu after independence. And his vision is what we saw in, was later than Sheikh Hasina's, in her determination to uphold those principles of our liberation movement, remained this long-standing thorn for those forces that were aligned with Jamaat-e-Islami and the anti-liberation movement. The effort to hold the war criminals accountable, to bring and seek justice for those women and the war, the liberation, freedom fighters, the war martyrs. The efforts that Sheikh Hasina and the dedication she put into this fight, and the challenge this kind of entrenched interest of those forces, made her, as just as a long kind of hatred against Sheikh Hasina is what we see in those pursuit for bringing her government and her down. So you can dress up, with whatever you like in terms of what happened in Bangladesh in July. You could call it a protest, you could call it a revolution, but in whatever terms you use, as the masks have come off and the evidence laid bare in front of us, we know this was no protest. This was no, it was a meticulously designed, in the words of our chief advisor from the interim government. It was a carefully planned and calculated conspiracy and a terrorist attack that we witnessed in Bangladesh in July 2024. The manner in which Sheikh Hasina was forced to sort of leave her office must also be understood in the broader historical and political context of Bangladesh. In a society where women in leadership have long faced deep-rooted, deep-seated social and political barriers, the campaign against the war, the war criminals, marked a particularly vicious stain and the strain of the gruesome sort of misogyny that was laid bare in August 24. Those attacks on her not only aimed at her policies, her politics, but her dignity as a woman. And such treatment goes beyond the partisan rivalry. It reflects the troubling pattern in our political culture that undermines respect for women in public life. One woman leader who has inspired many, many women like myself is undermined and targeted in this way. It is not simply an attack on an individual. It becomes an assault on the dignity and aspirations of women across the globe. And the silence, if I may add, of the sort of the guardians of the so-called democracy, human rights, and feminism was breathtaking when we were witnessing, the scenes on 5th of August in 24. The actions of men and women who were involved in the conspiracy, the humiliation and the elimination of all the progress that was made in the 17 years of Sheikh Hasina's government is shameful. It was inhuman. So on International Women's Day 2026, when the theme is right, justice and action for all women and girls, we are reminded how Bangabandhu had dedicated his life to establish those rights for women and men who had been oppressed for decades. His daughter sought justice for those war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the action of those against liberation, against Bangabandhu, against Sheikh Hasina have been laid bare in the last 18 months. It is now up to us and this new government to choose whether, it's up to the new government to choose whether they continue with this backlash, the impunity, or will they rise up for women's rights and social justice in Bangladesh?
Thank you, Ms. Chaudhary, to remind us the bird of blood for a nation like ours. Just to add on to what you were saying, you were mentioning Jamaat-e-Islami and what they did to our women in 1971. And just to let our viewers know, Jamaat-e-Islami is the opposition of our parliament in today. They are one of the most strongest political party in Bangladesh now. So when the political party who is guilty of insulting women in various ways since 1971, and when that same political party is very close to the power of Bangladesh, you can understand how our women would be treated under them. So it is not very surprising when Ms. Chaudhary was mentioning how Sheikh Hasina herself, being a leader, how she was targeted not only because she is a leader of the largest political party in Bangladesh, but also she dared to be a woman ruling a country like Bangladesh for 15 years. So, of course, the way Sheikh Hasina was treated in 5th of August 2024 is set as an example, like this kind of act, this kind of heinous act with women, either Sheikh Hasina or any ordinary women like us, that will go unpunished. And that chilling message is still there. Thank you very much. Miss Day, can I come to you now? As you are in education, can I talk to you about education of women and girls in Bangladesh? Now, we often hear about improvement in girls' education and education for women as a whole. Now, do you think education in Bangladesh is actually translating into greater independence and decision making power for women? Or do you think it's a gap there, or there's a different story there? So, Miss Day, to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Meher. Happy International Women's Day to everybody. To us, to all the great women who are struggling with their lives and with the constant bullying and everything and the harassment in their workplaces and also home. I would also like to thank Ms. Chaudhary and Mr. Jihan for giving us some insightful information. So to your question, Ms. Meher, Bangladesh has undeniably made major strides in girls' education, particularly during the Hasina-led Awami League era, which was from 2009 to 2023. Government initiatives such as nationwide stipend programs, free textbook distribution, and expansion of rural schools contributed to near gender parity in enrollment. So by 2022, Bangladesh's literacy rate reached 74.8%, with female literacy rising to 72.9%, a dramatic improvement compared to previous decades. Secondary school enrollment for girls climbed from 39% in 1998 to 67% by 2017, supported by flagship programs like the Female Secondary School Assistance Project and its later iterations, which helped over 2.3 million poor students, and 55% of them were girls. Now, these investments created visible gains in mobility, aspirations, and labor force entry for many young women. Under the Yunus-led interim regime, the worsening climate of insecurity, including rising violence, harassment, and institutional neglect, has directly undermined women's autonomy. Islamist extremism was rife during this period. Girls' football matches were called off due to threats from Islamists. Charnot, a school of music and a symbol of gender-neutral cultural practice, was burnt down. It appeared that all our achievements of the last decade was destroyed by Yunus and his supporting Jamaat led Islamists, when the so-called civil society remained silent bystanders. Now, looking ahead, Bangladesh's progress can still be protected, but only if political stability and institutional accountability are restored. It requires political commitment to progressive ethos. Education must be paired with safety, economic opportunities, and inclusive leadership pathways. As recent analyses emphasize, Bangladesh has achieved enrollment parity but continues to struggle with translating girls' education into genuine agency and leadership, with systematic barriers still shutting women out of decision making spaces. Real empowerment will require reinforcing educational gains with robust protections, stronger gender responsive governance, and renewed commitment to ensuring that girls' education leads not just to schooling, but to meaningful power over their lives and futures. I also would like to add that, as you can see, the current elected government, we can actually see a very handful participation of women of women's in the current you know current parliament, so which is really disappointing. We shouldn't forget that Begum Khalida Zia, who actually led this current ruling party for over a decade, and she was the first successful female prime minister of Bangladesh. And I mean, after all these things, I mean, when we see that 6 or 7 women only has been nominated as you know, as the electoral members for the parliament, that really kind of make us think like, is this ruling party really interested about women leadership or not? Thank you.
Oditi, Miss Day, can I just quickly add something on what you were saying as well? Not only the 7 women are being elected for the parliament, the women participating in election, the number was quite low as well, where the total candidacy was more than 4,000. It was only 109 women were participating in that election, and in that election, at, among these 109 women, 37 were contesting the election as an individual candidate. So altogether, all these political parties in Bangladesh, including the current government party BNP, all the political parties, they nominated 72 women only. That consist only 4%. So, of course, looks like, and Awami League was prohibited from participating in this election, looks like none of the political parties, they had any sort of plan to bring more women in the parliament at all, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I also would like to add on to that. The current opposition party, Jamaat Islami, you probably have remembered, the Amir of Jamaat Islami party said that women should be allowed only to work 5 hours, and they will kind of make this as like a permanent kind of policy if they are selected as the government. Also, if I remember it correctly, the same person mentioned the working women as the prostitutes. So this actually reveals, and this kind of proves like how women are actually what's the position of the women in both parties. And I mean, I must say, as a woman and as a working woman, I must say this is really concerning and very, very frustrating as well.
It is, Miss Day, and also another party, the National Citizen Party, which was allying with Jamaat-e-Islami. One of their leader, he actually mentioned the way he portrayed women. He basically said women without any hijab or burqa, they seem like naked. So you can imagine the psychology on them, the mentality they carry, and the parliament, the policy making, the legislation in their hand. It gives me a chilling effect. So it does not look very good at all. Miss Chaudhry, can I come back to you? I'm just going to go back to this year International Women's Day theme again. So the theme again, just to repeat, right, justice and action for all women and girls. Do you think Bangladesh current socio-political system is actually doing enough through policy, through institutions, through social change to enable women to gain equal opportunity, or do you think in some other way?
Thank you. So we know Bangladesh has demonstrated in the past the meaningful progress for women is possible when there is the political, there's strong political will and commitment, as we have witnessed under the leadership of Sheikh Hasina, a worthy daughter of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The country under her government era made notable strides in expanding girls' education, as we've heard, increasing women's participation in the workforce, strengthening protection against violence, and bringing women into position of leadership across the public institution. So these policies helped translate, and the Bali sort of embedded in the Constitution, 1972 Constitution of Equality, Justice, and Dignity, into, and it translated, these policies kind of translated into tangible opportunities for millions of women and girls. So she didn't only improve the sort of health indicators, she looked at the wider determinants of health. We know how thousands of families living below the poverty line, houses were built for them. The widow's benefit came through. There was all sorts of welfare benefits which tackled the sort of wider determinants of women, protecting women's right and violation of human rights. However, the present, as we have been discussing, there are alarming information around the sort of situation with how the interim government dealt with the surge in violence against women with total impunity. He seemed preoccupied with kind of dismissing all the cases against him that were, in the courts when he took power, when he seized power. He was preoccupied with this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that, the whole aspect of the mobocracy that we witnessed over the 18 months, the total chaos and the anarchy, he just seemed to be not interested in, and the whole momentum of improving lives for women, empowerment of women, just lost its course really in Bangladesh. So the present social political climate raises serious questions about whether this momentum will be now picked up with this. We've had an election, no matter what our views are about the, how that election, whether it was a fair and inclusive election, we all know the answer to those questions. But we do have a new government, so we need to ask them whether they would continue to defend women's rights, just as we did see in Sheikh Hasina's era, whether that momentum will be sustained, because we know policies alone are not enough. Progress depends on strong institutions, political stability, and a clear commitment to safeguard the rights of women in both public and private life. We've seen, and as you were discussing earlier, women, if they were playing sports, they've been attacked. If they were cultural activists, they've been attacked. They were being attacked simply for wearing, whatever dress codes they chose. We are being, how many hours women can work is being determined by extremists. It seems like, so in whatever aspects we look at, it's important to recognize the Bangladesh's struggle for women's rights has never been an isolated from its kind of, isolated from the broader political history as we've been talking about. So the ultimately the achieving of the promise of rights, justice, and action requires more than the rhetoric. Bangladesh needs sustained policy development, the will and the political commitment of the leadership, a strong institution that can protect women's rights, and the culture, the political culture that respects women's leadership, that can safeguard women's safety in public life and participation in the decision-making processes. Without these elements working together, the goal of equal opportunities for all women and girls remains difficult to fully realize, I think.
Thank you, Ms. Chaudhry, because Ms. Day and you both mentioned about Jamaat-e-Islami's very shiny commitment Women can women can work for 5 hours and they will pay for the rest. Um, we women actually do not want this. We do not want free money for staying home. All we want is a safe working environment, safe condition, and other roles, other facilities where all women can thrive with success. And when a political party like Jamaat Islami, where their motto is women cannot be in leadership role, when they come up with this kind of promises, as a history teacher, it reminds me of pre-Second World War Germany, where Hitler promised if women stays home, they can have certain amount of money or they will have a shiny gold badge where people will know that they produce a certain amount of children and they are stay-home mothers. So does not give us a right vibe at all. And sorry, can I quickly also mention, because we are talking about women politicians, we are talking about education as well. We have seen how women politicians were treated just because they were member of Awami League and Chhatra League. We have witnessed a women Chhatra League leader. She was forced to leave the exam hall when she was being beaten by other people, and her only crime was she was affiliated with Awami League. So this kind of event happened during Muhammad Yunus's time, and we haven't seen Tariq Rahman, the new prime minister, is saying or doing anything about it. Anyway, Miss Day, can I come to you now? And Jihan, after Miss Day, can you please, if you can please show us some more slides about what is happening to women in Bangladesh. But for now, Miss Day, can you please tell us, in recent statistics suggest that women's participation in policy making in Bangladesh remains strikingly low, despite women making up nearly half of the population and electorate. How do you explain this gap? And if we compare the past with the present, are we actually progressing in women empowerment, or are we witness something else? Up to you.
Thanks, Ms. Meher. I will answer your question in two parts. First, a more general overview of the structural challenges of women participation in policymaking, and second, what we see in the most recent electoral process and outcome, which I think I've already touched base. So with regard to the first point, women's participation in policymaking in Bangladesh remains low largely because of structural barriers, patriarchal norms, party gatekeeping, fears of harassment, and limited access to political networks continue to restrict women's entry into decision-making spaces. Educational gains have expanded aspirations, but these have not translated into equal political opportunity. Compared to the past, progress is mixed. Women's visibility in education and the workforce has improved, yet high-level political representation has stagnated, and recent instability has even eroded earlier gains. So what looks like empowerment on paper often makes deeper institutional and cultural constraints, suggesting Bangladesh is at risk of stagnation, if not regression, without deliberate reform. After 1996, this will be the lowest representation of directed elected women MP in the parliament. Of course, as already mentioned, Jamaati Islami did not field any female candidates, and I have already mentioned what their Amir have, kind of mentioned about the working women and about the women in general. So they are opposed to women leadership, of course, which is clearly proven. The number of women candidates from BNP was also extremely low, which makes us feel that whether or not the party is genuinely interested in women empowerment, when, as I mentioned already, the party was led by Begum Khaleda Zia, the first female prime minister of Bangladesh for over a decade. And when you have more than 70 Jamaat or its affiliates pro-Islamist party MPs in the parliament, you have all the reasons to be worried about the future of the country. I honestly do not consider BNP as a progressive party. There is no reason to think otherwise. In effect, they proudly claim to be center-right, which is a far more polite categorization than the majority of their supporter base would have stood for. Nevertheless, women leadership in the current government will be severely limited, if I'm brutally honest with you.
Thank you, Ms. Day, and thank you, Ms. Meher. So this part of the presentation, let me talk about the statistics on politics and economy and education. In Bangladesh, in the so-called July protest, we have seen huge participation from women students. No matter whether it was a protest or whatever it was, there were participation of women. We have seen person like Dr. Zara and other female students being the leader of that so-called protest. But what actually happened afterwards? What happened in 2026 election? Where are all the women? In this current parliament that is gonna start from the 12th, there are only 7 women candidates who won the election. Only 7. There were 1,981 candidates, total candidates, and only 78 of those 1981 were women, a meager 3.90%. And we are only focusing on Jamaat, right? That Jamaat did not appoint any women candidate. It was not only Jamaat. There were 51 parties, 30 parties, there were no female candidate for 30 parties. And it shows the trend. You know, in a conservative country like Bangladesh, in politics, women have been used as a shield. They were actually the shield during that protest. They were not there for their leadership qualities. They were being used as shield, which is wrong. Why I say that they were being used as shield? Because of what this Jamaat Amir has said and what Jamaat as a party has said. You already talked about it. Jamaat Amir has said that women who work outside are prostitutes. This is not only Jamaat Amir, this is the mentality of the patriarchal society. You know, there are so many people like Jamaat Amir who think that way. And this is wrong. 5-hour work plan. Why would women get the same money by working only 5 hours? This is actually a way to remove them from the workforce. Because if I am managing a team and I need 2 employees, I need the 2 employees to do the same work, to be having the same reward or same compensation. So this is actually not doing anything good for women. This is a way to remove them from the workforce and chain them in home. This is clear from also the banking sector. If we look at the banking sector here, the data, you will see the banking sector women participation has decreased. Normally it is fairly low, but it decreased even further. It was 17.57%, and in 1 year there was a 5% drop. Education. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has done so many things for women education. Despite of whatever Awami League government had done, I, from my very personal opinion, would say that there are more that needs to be done. When I was young, I was a kid, there was something called the child marriage, you know, and growing up, it slowly gone away from society. It improved, but it appears that we are going back to square one. these are the factors that prevent women from educating themselves. Ms. Meher, now let me go out of script and let me actually tell you folks something about what I think is the problem, very personally. We all can talk about state, we all can talk about society, what state can do, what society can do, but I believe it all starts at home. You know, when I was a boy, or when someone is a boy or someone is a girl, they learn from their family, in that family, how women are treated. If women are not treated fairly and equally at home, that person will have that idea growing up. And it boils down to society. So to improve the situation, I think we all need to start at home. Because a person who sees his maternal grandfather treating his daughter and the son the same, they will have a certain idea. And if they see the opposite, they will have another idea. And these all ideas boil down to society. So I think we all need to focus at our home. Back to you, Ms. Meher. You are on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I agree with you fully. The charity begins at home, so the home environment needs to be improved. But at the same time, the state has a lot of responsibility as well. And before I go to Ms. Chaudhary again, if we can, if I can share a little bit of information about state responsibility. The interim government last year, they I think they made more than 20 reform committee, and they're one of all this reform committee is one of their selling points. Everywhere Muhammad Yunus went, he was talking about this reform committee and how excellent this reform committee is doing. So one of this reform committee was Women Affair Reform Committee. I believe last year May, that Women Affair Reform Committee, they submitted a 443-page worth of report. And in that reform report, they suggested many things, such as uniform family law, such as women equality in many other aspects, in education. They also proposed a 600 worth of parliament, where 300 will be women MPs. And they also proposed something quite brave. They proposed that Bangladesh fully acknowledge the CEDAW. So it was a good report. It was a good report from the Reform Committee. And Yunus done a big program with lots of camera flashing. He's accepting the report, saying it's a good one as well. And what happened? The following day and some other days, those religious fundamentalist group, including the NCP leaders and others, they started protesting against this report, saying if this report is taken for policy making, the whole Bangladesh will shut and everything. And since then, we haven't heard of this report at all. Nobody mentioned about this report from this interim government at all, and the current government as well, they are not talking about that report either. So all this proposal, all this reform committee, including the Women Affair Reform Committee, was just an eyewash, nothing else. Yeah. Sorry, I was being a bit excited. But anyway, Ms. Chaudhary, can I come to you with some legal perspective? Now, from a legal perspective, would you say the legal framework in Bangladesh is largely adequate and the main problem is implementation, or are there still major gaps in law themselves? What do you think?
Thank you. So I think it's only fair to say I'm not an expert on legal matters, but from a perspective of a social justice campaigner, I think the situation in Bangladesh is mixed. On paper, the legal framework is relatively comprehensive. There are laws protecting women against domestic violence, harassment, trafficking policies, supporting girls' education, and provisions for women's participation in local governance. These laws signal a formal formal commitment to gender equality. However, there are two issues that remain. So one, as you have touched with regards to the interim government, the implementation gap. That's the primary challenge. So many laws are not consistently enforced. The police and judicial systems are often slow. They're under-resourced or influenced by social and political pressures, which limits women from accessing justice. For instance, in the cases of domestic violence or workplace harassment, it may be reported, but rarely leads to meaningful legal recourse, and awareness of rights remains low in sort of rural areas in Bangladesh. Then there's also this sort of the legal gaps, if you like. So while much, of the legal gaps kind of exists, some areas still lack clarity or strengthening. So issues such as workplace discrimination, I think Ms. Day touched on this. Discrimination beyond the garment sector within the garment sector, for example, we've heard quite a lot about protection for women in sort of informal labor as well as formal workplaces. The inheritance rights and comprehensive sexual harassment laws in public spaces are either weak or inconsistently codified. So additionally, the customary and religious practices sometimes conflict with the statutory laws, creating legal ambiguities and undermining women's rights as a result. So in conclusion, I think Bangladesh has made important strides, particularly under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's term, in developing the legal protections for women, but the implementation is the bigger bottleneck, if you like, compounded by lingering gaps in specific areas. This means that while the legal frameworks provides a foundation, real empowerment depends on stronger enforcement, awareness, and reforms to cover remaining vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Ms. Chaudhry. Thank you. So very insightful information. Thank you. Ms. Day, can I come to you again? I want to talk to you about violence against women. We have witnessed, very unfortunately, some very tragic incident for girls and women both, and we have seen some numbers that Jihan kindly showed us as well. Now, I want to ask you, in cases involving violence against women, we often see some public outrage, but it followed by limited long-term changes. Why do you think systematic reform remains so difficult in this area, and what is happening in post-Sheikh Hasina era? Ms. Day.
Thank you, Ms. Meher. Well, systematic reform on violence against women in Bangladesh remains difficult because the problem is rooted in deep structural and institutional weaknesses. Despite periodic public outrage, justice systems often fail to resolve effectively. Police inaction, delayed investigations, and mediation replacing prosecution leave survivors without meaningful redress, reflecting a pattern of institutional neglect. These weaknesses are compounded by persistent social norms, patriarchal attitudes, stigma, and community pressure, which discourage reporting and enable impunity. Now, Broader gender-based vulnerabilities also persist. UNICEF notes that Bangladesh continues to struggle with high rates of child marriage and violence against adolescent girls, which Zihan also mentioned a bit about it, showing that harmful attitudes and structural inequalities remain deeply entrenched even after decades of advocacy and development gains. Political instability further undermines the progress. Recent spikes in violence against women, instances of intimidation, and weak institutional responses under the Yunus-led interim administration illustrate how quickly gains can erode when governance falters. You probably have noticed, and you probably have remembered the shocking incident that just happened, and Jihan also mentioned about it. An 8-year-old girl in Chittagong, she was brutally raped and murdered. It was absolutely horrifying and absolutely shocking. I mean, to visualize this sort of incident. So ultimately, reform is difficult because public outrage targets individual cases, while the underlying system, policing, legal processes, social norms, and political accountability remains unchanged. We just need massive structural changes within the society, and that needs to be implemented, obviously, by the state. And sustainable progress demands long-term investment in justice sector reform, protection mechanisms, and cultural change, without which each new tragedy simply exposes the same unresolved structural failures.
Um, Thank you, Miss Day. Thank you, Miss Day. Um, I am concerned about time, but I cannot hold myself from sharing something. This UNIS government, they changed a very significant law about domestic violence. So now the Amendment Act 2025, it says if any woman wants to complain about domestic violence by her husband or in-laws, before she can ask for legal help, she first needs to go to mediation with her husband. So you can understand how difficult it must have been for the women in Bangladesh, where the domestic violence rate is quite severe, quite high, and she has to sit in the same table with the abuser, participate in mediation, where the mediation can be translated in a many different way. And that new law was introduced by the law advisor. He claimed because of the long backlog the mediation is needed. It is terrible, it is tragic. And again, we are very short in time, but Miss Day, can I quickly ask you about women labor? Now, women labor has been fundamental to Bangladesh economic transformation, but has there any contribution translated into proportional recognition, economic security, and decision-making power? I know we've been talking about this more or less throughout, but I want to hear a bit more information from you. Then I'll go to Ms. Chaudhry.
Thank you very much. Women's labor, especially in garments, agriculture, and micro-enterprise, has been central to Bangladesh's economic rise. Yet this contribution has not translated into proportional recognition or power. While women's workforce participation expanded under long-term investment in girls' education and stipends during the Awami League years, structural inequalities persist. Girls' enrollment improved significantly, with female literacy reaching 72.94% in 2022, which was again during the Sheikh Hasina's time, helping many women enter paid work. However, decision-making roles remain rare. Recent analysis show systematic barriers continue to limit women's leadership despite educational gains. Economic security is also fragile. UNICEF reports that adolescent girls still face high rates of child marriage and exclusion from employment or training, undermining long-term empowerment. Recent instability and rising violence against women under the Yunus-led interim regime have further weakened women's safety and autonomy, eroding earlier progress in recognition and rights. So this way, women drive growth, but structural power remains unequal, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ms. Day. And just to add on to what you and Ms. Chaudhary have been saying, we must not forget at the same time, though every woman is being victim of what is happening in Bangladesh, we also know the women from religious minority, they are the worst sufferer. Whatever is happening, they are suffering in a worse way, many way. Because of timing, we cannot share many events, many incidents, but we must acknowledge what is happening to them too. Now, Ms. Chaudhary, can I quickly ask you another question? Do you think the country, Bangladesh, is creating sufficient financial, legal, and social support system for women to lead and thrive economically?
Thank you. I think, the alarming picture and the slides in our discussion, the alarming picture of the surge, if you like, in sort of violence against women, and particularly the kind of the mirroring of what Bangladeshi women witnessed in 1971, particularly looking at sort of women from religious minority groups being targeted, women in public life being targeted, and the derogatory, the vile comments we are hearing from political parties like Jamaat Islam, the King's Party, the so-called King's Party, the NCP. These are the NCP are supposed to be sort of a younger generation who often tell us that we can't go on, talking about 1971. They belong to a different generation. Well, in their the philosophy they seem to be adopting, and in their action, what they're telling us is they are very much about the philosophy of the anti-liberation movement. They are very much about the philosophy that Jamaat Islam follows, which doesn't have much to do with Islam, but has a lot to do with the heinous crimes that we, and the genocide of 1971, and the targeted sort of attacks that we have seen on Awami League activists and the female activists within Awami League. We've seen, the anarchy in Bangladesh, and the total kind of breakdown in law and order, and the impunity. The thousands of police officers have been killed, for example, including female police officer who was heavily pregnant and begging for her life, and her child's life was killed. And we have seen the interim government act with total impunity, while rapists and terrorists, rapists who were convicted for their crimes in 1971, terrorists who were convicted for their criminal activities and crimes against humanity, have been released, from prison to carry on with their mobocracy and the anarchy. So I think it's a very grim and a worrying picture in Bangladesh in the current situation. But in short, the core changes requires a holistic approach, a systemic approach where legal rights and economic opportunities, institutional support, the social norms, all reinforce each other. And above all, the political will and the commitment has to be there. And without addressing this kind of interconnected barriers simultaneously, gains in one area like schooling or employment will remain fragile and partial, in my view.
Thank you very much, all of you. We are very close to close our program today. But before we go, I just want to say something about women progression. Now, women progression means not only women progression means a nation itself is progressing. So when the women is being pushed back in Bangladesh or elsewhere, any corner of the world, it means we are not doing something right as a nation as a whole. So my request to everyone, whoever is watching this program, you are from Bangladesh or you are from anywhere else, think about our women. Think about our women. Raise your voice for our women, because our women need all of us. And when our women progress, the women in Bangladesh progress, women in the world, they take one step forward to progress as well, and so as the whole humanity. So this is the end of our program, but it is not end of the conversation. The conversation will continue. The conversation should continue. We will not stop until we reach our goal, until we save every single member of our community. Thank you very much for being with us. And I again thank you very, very much, Miss Day, Miss Chaudhary, Jihan, everyone. Thank you again. And we will see you all next week, same day, same time. Till then, take care, look after yourself, and look after the women next to you. Goodbye, Joy Bangla.
Goodbye. Joy Bangla.